Hey guys, it's DJ from ANSgear.com, and this is the detailed breakdown of the Etek4 by Planet Eclipse. When you first get your Etek4 AM or LT and you open the box, you'll see that it includes a lot of nice little things that come with it. From the spare parts kit, that includes everything from the O-rings that you're going to need to do minor repairs, maintenance on the gun, all the way to extra cup seal, screws that are already covered in blue Loctite, so they're not going to vibrate out on you. And even comes with a gasket for your solenoid. Very rarely are you going to need that, but it's nice that they include it right in the packaging. You don't have to worry about ever ordering that from Planet Eclipse. Now, the first thing you'll probably see is this big, nice, full-color manual. It's going to tell you everything from how to turn the gun on, how to change your features, the general maintenance, how to break the gun down. There's even a really nice troubleshooting section that if you are having a specific problem, that you go to the troubleshooting section and it'll say leak down the barrel. And it'll tell you what the causes are, what you'd have to fix, change to make that stop. And then if that doesn't work, then it'll say, okay, try this. It's a really nice manual, and if you read this, you're never going to have any issues. You won't have to call your local shop, call Planet Eclipse, call us. It's really nice. It's a very nice manual. Underneath the manual, you're going to see your barrel stock that's included. You know, you always want to use that when you're off the field, when you bring your gun into a pro shop. Always use your barrel stock. It just tells people your gun's safe. You know, you're not going to accidentally shoot somebody. It's very nice. Just use that. It also includes Planet Eclipse gun oil. You're going to use that for all your general maintenance. I recommend that for your ram. You can even use it on the bolt if you like to. Now, personally, on the regulators, both the LPR and the inline, I like to use a lube. I feel it's going to stay in place better. Something like Dow 33, Hater Sauce, something of that nature. It's going to stay in place longer, and you're not going to have to break down your regs as much. Now, when you do have to take your gun apart, they give you all the Allen keys that you need. Every size for this gun is going to be included in this Allen key set. Even comes with a nice little holder. A lot of other guns just come with the Allen keys in a plastic bag. It's nice that they have the little holder there for you. You can even use it to apply more torque if you're having issues getting a screw out. And then lastly, obviously you're going to see your gun right here, and then the two-piece shaft barrel up here in the lid. Again, it's a 14.5-inch barrel, and it simply threads together. It is the two pieces are reverse threaded, so it's the opposite of what you'd think. Alright guys, now what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to go over some of the features of the marker and then break it down for you so you can see the insides of the marker and how it works. The LT and the AM are very similar except for one main difference. The LT is made up of some composite parts where the AM is all metal. The composite parts on the LT are going to be the frame, the ASA front cap here, the feed neck, and the eye covers. You can play with those just fine unless you really, take a dive, that kind of thing. That's the only time I've ever seen somebody break any of the composite parts. You have to really, really, really try to break that stuff. Now, the features of the Etek4 versus the 3, there's some updates. It's got the 2012 OOPS on off, which is nice. It is a purging system, so there's not going to be any gas left in the gun when you turn the OOPS off. It now comes with the ZIC 2, whereas before that was an upgrade. It's now included in the marker. And you do have the cure bolt, which is, it seems like it's an ever-changing system. They're always looking for ways to tweak the cure bolt to make it better. And with the Etek stuff, you see a trickle-down effect. When they come up with a new design for the Ego version, they'll take what they've learned in the past and put it into their Etek bolts. So that's really nice. Now you've also got the clamping feed neck with the cam lever. That's a nice plus. You don't have to worry about carrying around Allen keys to put your hopper, take it off, put it on. They did update the regulator here too, and it now has the angled collar, so there's going to be less tension on the macro line. It'll be easier to get the macro line in and out, so that's a nice plus. Now I can pull the bolt here and give you kind of a look at what the bolt now looks like. Obviously it's a very small bolt. That's nice because it lowers the reciprocating mass, which means there's less moving back and forth, which is less going to make, it's not going to kick as much. There's not weight flying back, flying forward. The front of the cure bolt has these two O-rings here. They help to seal the breech when the gun is fired, but also it acts as kind of a cushion to prevent you from chopping paint. Sometimes with paint, especially if it's a small bore size, what can happen is as the stack is being pressed into the feed neck, especially by a force feed loader, the second ball can sometimes come into the breech. Even though there's still a ball below it, the eyes are going to read like everything's fine. Now the cure takes care of that with using these O-rings and this cut in the top of the bolt here. So as the bolt comes forward, that little cut goes underneath the ball, and the O-rings help to push it up instead of the front of the bolt just cutting through the bottom of that second ball on the ball stack. You will see a little bit of a recess here. The front is cut out. Now you'll see a more drastic cut on the newer bolts that like the Cure 2 and the 3s that come with the Ego. But again, that's an upgrade that you can put into this marker. But the cure that comes with this one is actually pretty nice. If you ever need to replace your pin or pull this pin and put it in an aftermarket bolt, it's fairly simple. In front of the pin in this bolt, there's going to be a spring in here with either a cap over it and that like a round edge that catches on the pin, or I'm not sure about this one, there could be a ball detent in there as well. And that's basically what rides in this channel here that you see on the pin. Now what you're going to do to get that out is you're going to turn the pin. It will require a little bit of force to get that out, to make that turn. But as soon as you do, you pull up on it, and then the spring and the retainer there are going to come out the back. And to put it back in, you're going to put in the spring, put in either the retainer, which whether either it's a little cap that goes over the spring or a ball detent. I'm sorry, a ball bearing. Put that in there. You press it down with an Allen key to where it sits. It's sitting below the hole for the bolt pin, and then you slide the pin in from the top and just kind of work it in until the pin is holding the spring and the ball detent, the ball bearing back already. And then that's basically how you take the pin in and out. Now, obviously the feed neck removal is very simple. Just an Allen key to the screw back here. You're really not going to need to pull this off for any reason. You're not going to replace this feed neck. It's a nice aluminum feed neck. Basically, then it just pops right off. It's going to take a little bit of force, but you can just pop it off like that. The only reason you're going to take this off is really to clean underneath it. You get a ball break, you get shot in the gun. That's how that's going to come off. Now, to get into the grips, fairly simple. You're just going to pull the 3 grip screws here, and there it goes. Once you get the 3 grip screws out, the grips are just going to fold over. And then you're going to be able to see in both sides. On the Etex, it's a little different. You're not going to have a big open space that the board sits in horizontally. It's going to sit in like a vertical setup like that. And then to pull the grips off completely, you just do the same thing on the other side. Now, one of the cool things that Eclipse does is they include this little sticker on the inside of the grips that are going to tell you the LED colors and what they mean. And also, you know, it's going to give the range of the change, how to change the settings. Now you're going to have full access to the board on this side. I'll just move the grips out of the way. Basically, obviously the gun runs on a 9-volt battery. Let me pop that off. And then you're going to see a couple different plugs here on the side of the board. You've got the connection for the eyes. You're going to have the connection for the solenoid. And you're going to have the connection for the micro switch. So if you ever, you know, break a micro switch by over adjusting the trigger or anything like that, basically you're going to pop out these 2 screws here, pull the plug, and then just pop that plug out. Now, since we're going to pull the frame off, you're going to want to pop out the eye wires. That's going to be the one with the 4 wires and the solenoid wires. You're going to want to be careful. If you have a small pair of pliers, try to use those to grip the white heads of the wires because you can possibly pull out the wires from the plug itself, and then you're just going to have to end up replacing whatever it's attached to. It's the eyes, the solenoid. It's not cheap. It's not fun. You don't want to do it. And then to get the frame off, you got 2 screws, one in the back here, one in the front. You're going to want to pull out the macro line from the regulator or the ASA. And then you're going to undo the screws in the front and the back. Sometimes, first time from the factory, they can be a little stiff. You know, they want to put them in there good so they don't vibrate out during shipping, anything like that. So just take your time. You want to make sure the Allen key is completely in the head of the screw so you don't strip it out. Front one's a little awkward because you got the trigger guard in the way. It sits right next to the screw. And then you're just going to slide the frame off. You want to make sure to avoid catching either solenoid wires or the eye wires on the frame as you're pulling it off. The trigger actually sits in like a carrier. It's a little different than some of the other manufacturers out there. It's kind of nice. It allows them to single out instead of having to have a trigger pin to hold it through. Sometimes it's hard to change triggers, make adjustments if you have to pull if you have to hammer out a trigger pin. So it's nice that you can pull the trigger without using, you know, a hammer and a tap basically. The trigger itself has 3 adjustment points. It's going to have one right here, and that's going to adjust your back travel, how far the trigger can travel backwards. And then there's 2 in the top. There's the front one, which is going to be your magnetic return. So it's basically, you can tell if you're unsure which one it is. Take your Allen key, and it'll stick to it a little bit. That'll tell you that that's the magnetic one. And that's going to give you, you can adjust that, and that'll change how much force the trigger's pulled back into position with. Now the one right behind that is going to be your forward travel, how far that one can move forward, how far the trigger can go back out once it's fired. On the underside of the body here, you'll see that the solenoid is now its direct mount to the body, which is nice because then you don't have 3 different hoses here. You only have a single hose that runs from the LPR to the manifold that sits between the solenoid and the body. So that's really nice. I don't have to worry about hoses leaking, pinching hoses with the trigger frame screws, the trigger frame itself, or the grip screws. That was an issue in some of the past models of the Ego. The grip screws could pierce the hoses that were in the gun. This silver-headed screw that you see right here is actually the retainer for the valve. Now, if you're going to pull the valve for whatever reason, if you're having a valve leak that's going to give you leaking down the barrel, that would be what you're going to pull to change the valve O-rings. I really don't recommend taking that out unless it's absolutely necessary. Something for the most part nobody's going to have to do unless you really have an issue. So I would leave it, and you never really have to pull that out. Don't do it unless it's absolutely necessary, or you have an Eclipse tech do it for you. Now, the reg setup is a little different on the Etek4 than it is the 3s. It is the updated regulator, which is a big plus for the gun. But instead of being the normal setup with the threads on the regulator itself threading into the body, it's separated. The threads are on the body, and you thread the regulator onto it. Now, there is a downside to that. You can't, put an aftermarket regulator on the Etek4. You're stuck with the Eclipse reg, but in my eyes, that's not a bad thing. The Eclipse regulators are great. They're very consistent, very low maintenance. Not a big deal. I would stick with it as it is. To get to your LPR, to get to your cup seal, to get to, well, they call it a poppet, to get to the valve spring, what you're going to do is inside of here, you've got a screw that you're just going to remove. Simply with your Allen key. Now you might sit there and turn it for a while and think, oh, it's not coming out, but there's going to be pressure on it from the valve spring. So you might have to turn the gun over, press on the LPR, and that'll drop out. That's what it looks like. Now what that was doing is that was retaining in your LPR body and your LPR. Inside of the gun now, you're going to have your valve spring, and you're going to have your cup seal. Now, again, this is something you're not going to have to normally go into. You're not going to have to normally change. If you're getting a leak down the barrel, normally it's going to be a cup seal issue, and that's what you're going to want to change first. If you're uncomfortable with that, I would say, let an Eclipse tech do it for you. Take it to your local shop, somebody who knows what they're doing, and they can change that out for you. Now, as I said earlier, we've got the Zik 2s, which is again an upgrade from the Etek3 to the Etek4. So that's really nice. Again, you just under your back cap here, your bolt's already out, and then sometimes you can take a little Allen key and just give it a little push, and your ram's going to come out the back. Now, what makes it different than previous models of the ram system is this little piece you see sticking off the back of the ram actually enters the back cap instead of before where it was pretty much just the bumper on the back and it just hit the back of the ram cap. Inside the ram cap there's an O-ring. So what happens is the back of the ram seals that O-ring, and the air that's trapped behind it gets compressed, and it acts like a bumper to slow it down while keeping this mass from hitting your ram cap. Now there's going to be a little bit of contact, but it's going to slow down before it actually hits the ram cap, the bumper hits it. Now the reason that's a plus is both the speed and the mass that's moving back and forth is going to affect the kick of the gun. So if you can slow that mass down before it has to suddenly stop, the gun's going to have less kick. So that's why the Zik works, is it slows your ram down before that contact, that full contact between the back cap and the ram. Now, when you're doing maintenance on your ram, you got two O-rings that you might need to change, this front one here and this very back one. The back piece here, that's going to be your bumper, and then this front one here is actually also going to be a bumper for when it goes forward. It's not something you're going to have to worry about. It doesn't seal air, so the only time you're going to change that is if it's chewed up. If it's worn out, you might need to change that every once in a while. Now back to the body, you've got your eye cover screw. Now, I'm just going to take one side off. They're identical on both sides. You've got your eye wire that runs up the channel and just pops in right there. And then you also have your ball detent. Let's pop the ball detent out. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to keep the gun from double feeding. There's two. There's one on each side. It's like a little rubber nubbin. If your gun starts double feeding, where you're shooting two balls at one time, what that's going to be is it's going to be your detents. So you're going to want to check those every once in a while. If they're ripped, torn, sliced off, you're going to want to change those. It's pretty simple. Again, you just pull off the eye cover, pop out the old one, pop the new one back into place. It's just got a little groove that it sits in, holds itself in place. Again, the eye wire is just going to go back into its groove. Take the cover, set the cover over it, and the screw just goes right back in. Now that we got the eye cover back in place, we can focus on putting the poppet, the valve spring, and the LPR back in place. Now, this is the correct orientation to put it back in the gun. This rod here actually goes through the valve, and that's what the ram hits to open the valve. So when this is back in the gun, you want the spring to actually go over the end of it like that, and it will sit in the LPR body. Now, when you try to put it back in the gun, sometimes it's helpful to use the spring to help guide it back in, because it sometimes doesn't want to go back through the valve itself. You'll notice that it's nice and centered once it's in there. Now, the LPR body is just going to go back over the spring, and it will require some force to hold it in place while you look through here to see the hole line up so you can put this retaining pin, the retaining screw back in. It's just going to slide right through the middle there. And again, you're going to go back with your Allen key and just tighten it down. Now that we got that back in, we can put our regulator back in place. It's just going to thread on. We've got the O-ring up here at the top that's going to seal it between the inline body and the body of the gun, so there's not going to be a leak there. Next, we're going to put the Zic 2 back in. Again, just slides right in the back here. Pop it in, back cap, twist it in place. Allen key, just tighten it down. That's back in. Now, putting the bolt back in place, you need to make sure that it lines up with the Zic and is in place with the Zic. If it's like this, and you can push it all the way forward, and then you're not getting that pushback from the valve, that means you're not in the Zic, you're not in the ram. Once you're in the ram, you're going to feel the resistance from the valve. It's going to want to push back on you. Then that way you know it's back in the ram. You got to be careful because you don't want to put the pin in front of the ram and then fire the marker, because the ram's going to fly forward and hit the pin. It can damage the pin, it can damage the ram. It's not a good thing. You always want to make sure that pin is sitting in the ram like it's supposed to. Next, we're going to put the trigger frame back on. You just kind of want to guide the wires through. It's easy when there's no grips on, because you can see if you're pinching anything. And you just guide it back in. If you ever meet any kind of resistance, you're going to want to figure out what is causing that resistance so that you don't pinch anything, you don't pinch any wires, anything like that. You're just going to grab your frame screws, Pop them back in. Take your Allen key. Now I like to put one in, get it started. Don't tighten it all the way down so you can get the second one started so it'll line up properly. And then you can go ahead and tighten both of them down. Just give it a nice, once you feel some resistance, you can give it a little bit of a twist. Don't want to tighten them too down because, if you try to get them out again, you can strip them out and then it's difficult to get them back out. Now, you're just going to match up the wires with the appropriate plugs on the board. The solenoid, again, is it's 2 wires, so you look for the plug that's got just, spot for 2 wires. And then for the eye cover, the eyes, it's got 4 wires. You just put them back in the plug. It's got 4 wires. I like to use a little Allen key to kind of push it, make sure it's all the way in there. Putting the feed neck back on, it's just a matter of popping it back in place. It's going to take a little bit of force. Just going to pop right back in like that. It'll move around a little bit until you tighten it down. Tighten it down. It's all in place. Macro line. Sometimes it helps to do it from an angle. Pop it in. Straighten it out. Give it a good press. You want to make sure that it's fully seated in there because it's a compression fitting. So this collar here, when it's gassed up, gets pushed out and tries to grab onto the macro line. If it's not in there all the way, the line can just pop right back out and it's just gonna leak on you. And then finally, you're just gonna put your grips back in place. It's really simple. And then of course, you're gonna watch out for your wires. Pop your battery back in. It's another thing when you're pulling the battery, you want to be careful. You don't want to pull it by the wires. You want to, pull the top off. That way you don't, damage the wires. You don't pull them off the board. And then lastly, you just take your grip screws. The breakdown of the regulators is not too difficult. Again, you saw how they come off. It's a matter of just pulling the pistons out, cleaning them off, relubing them, popping everything back in just the way you found it. The manual is fantastic. It's full color. It's going to show you exactly how to do the maintenance on the regs. Just read up. It's very easy. And that's pretty much it. You've got the ASA. It's very simple. If you need to do maintenance on that, you're going to turn it into the off position. There's a pin in the middle. You can depress it. And what that gives you access to is the pin's coming right through an Allen key slot. So you take the Allen key, you put it in, unscrew it. That's going to allow you to pull that screw out. It's going to allow you to pull the pin out and the O-ring that sits in this on off here. Anytime you're getting a leak down here, if it's not the tank O-ring and it's actually leaking from the ASA, that would be the O-ring you're going to change. And then simply put things back and then turn it on. If you have any other questions, you can contact Planet Eclipse directly and talk to one of their techs. But if you're ready to purchase the Planet Eclipse Etek4 AM or LT, you can get that at ansgear.com.